And we're live. Ladies and gentlemen, I never thought that one mistake would lead to my husband divorcing me and hating me forever. I thought that the friendship I had with my husband's boss was never going to be the problem, but it ended up costing me a great deal because I lost my husband and also my best friend. I'm 30 years old and I'm an event planner. Event planning has been my passion for so many years. My husband is Gabriel. He's 35 years old and he's an architect. Gabriel and I got married about 3 months ago. It's been great. Gabriel and I met through a mutual friend, and it was love at first sight. He was very charming at first, and I really thought he was just doing so in order to get me. But I was very wrong. He's one of my best friends. I met her in college, and we've been together through everything. It was Anne's birthday party last summer, and like every other year since college, she decided to throw her usual birthday parties. I knew she could always go all out for those parties, and I always supported her. It was like every other day, I was having lunch with Anne when she brought up her party. As usual, we discussed the details, and I was looking forward to the party on the day of Anne's birthday. I got ready to attend and dressed to impress as usual. I got to the venue and wished my best friend a happy birthday. She asked if I should go with her to say hello to the guests, and I agreed. It was a lovely evening. A few hours into the party, I was already feeling tired. I went to meet Anne, who was across the room. When I ran into someone, I apologized and left. I met another person and told her I was leaving, but she insisted I should still stay for a little while. We were speaking. When a man joined us, Anne chatted with him for a bit, and I was left standing. Later on, she introduced us, and I found out it was the same guy I'd seen earlier. I apologized again, and Anne told me all about him, saying he was the guy she'd been telling me about. I knew she was just trying to set us up, though. I was left standing with Gabriel, a guy I didn't know at the time. I was pretty annoyed with Anne, but I knew she was good at making connections because I hadn't been in a relationship for a while. Gabriel and I got chatting, and he told me a lot about himself. I asked him why I'd never met him, even when he was close to my best friend, and said he normally sees me, but he didn't know if I was taken. I told him he could have just come up to me, but he never did until then. I told Gabriel I needed to leave because I had an event the next day, but we didn't get to exchange numbers. I said my goodbyes. I told Anne I'd meet her for lunch in a couple of days. I had an event the next day, so I had to get back to work. I kept thinking about Gabriel because I had a great evening with him. I knew some of the people at Anne's event, but his company was the best. I later found out that I was a bit down because I thought maybe he wasn't interested. That's why you didn't ask for my number. I decided not to worry about it and just let it go. The next day, I met up with Anne, and we talked about fashion, like we always do. Anne was surprised and went on to talk about how I shouldn't just wait for things to happen naturally. She also mentioned that Gabriel might have been interested in me, but I told her that we'd only talked at her event and that there was nothing more to it. I also said that it wasn't that serious because if it were, he could have asked for my number, but he didn't. The guy I should have asked for his number is the most forward of the two of them. She always got any guy she wanted. She always went for whatever she wanted. Anne somehow got my phone and dialed Gabriel's number before I could say anything to her. Gabriel picked up the phone, so I had no choice but to call. I told him I was the one, and he was surprised because he wasn't expecting me to call. I told him we hadn't exchanged numbers. We spoke for a few minutes, and he invited me out for lunch, which I accepted. I ended the call, and I didn't know what to do or how to feel. I gave him a call because I didn't want to seem desperate, but as usual, we had a good laugh about it. I told her I'd had lunch with him the next day. That evening, I went to see my father. It had been a while since I'd been in touch with him because I'd spent a long time not knowing who my father was. I managed to track him down, but I wasn't sure how I felt because it seemed like he'd abandoned me. In fact, he'd never even known I existed. He asked for a chance to be in my life, and I gave it to him. I didn't want to punish him for what he didn't know. I had dinner with my dad, and he kept telling me he was trying to be everything and more for me, and I appreciated it. I went home tired from a long day and I slept well the next morning. I went to work and I met a couple who were planning to get married. I was in awe of them. They were so in love. I felt a little jealous because I wanted to have someone I could share my life with. I didn't want to dwell on it too much because I tend to overthink things and stress myself out. I finished with the couple and it was already lunchtime. Not long after, Gabriel came to pick me up and took me to my favorite restaurant. I didn't know how he knew, but I was sure it was through work. Anne was clearly the one who had written her name all over it. Gabriel was as charming as ever, and we had a great time. He told me about how he had lost his family and how he had never been the same. I felt really sad for him because I knew what it felt like to not have any family. We finished our lunch and Gabriel dropped me off. She promised to see me later in the week, which was a month since I'd last heard from her. I didn't understand why he could ghost me like that. I thought we were doing great. I tried to reach him a couple of times in that month, and he didn't respond. I figured maybe he wasn't into me. I thought maybe I was being too forward. A few days later, Gabriel showed up at my store and told me he'd been busy with work and he was sorry. I understood because I knew how work can be. We went out a few times, and in those times we became very close. We went out on a couple of dates, and he finally asked me. I said yes, and he finally took me out as his girlfriend. I thought he took his time, though, because I'd been waiting for a long time. Gabriel and I dated for a few months, and our relationship grew into something beautiful. I met some of his friends, and it was really lovely. Anne kept going on and on about how she was the one who brought us together. I never gave her the satisfaction because I had always said she never really introduced herself. We had been attending her parties for years, and I kept teasing her about it, and she loved it. Gabriel proposed to me a few months later, and I panicked at some point. I didn't know what to say. Gabriel gave me some time to think about it, which I appreciated because he wasn't trying to rush me. I talked to Anne, who reassured me that Gabriel loved me and could do anything for me. I said yes to him the very next day. The next day, he was over the moon. We planned our wedding, and it was beautiful. I'd never felt so happy. My dad walked me down the aisle, and I'd never seen him so proud. After the wedding, Gabriel asked me to move in with him, but I didn't know what to say. I'd told him we should look for a place together and pay for it together, but I changed my mind because I was busy with work. I'd taken a few weeks off after the wedding, and seeing that house hunting could be another problem added to my work schedule, I decided we should move in together. We started living together, and things were going well. We could wake up together, have breakfast before going to work, have our regular dinners with friends and family, and I always felt safe around Gabriel. He was almost everything I wanted and more. He would listen to me and solve any issue I had. I was in the store finishing up a meeting with my client when Gabriel tanged. He came in and told me his boss was having a birthday party the next day. I was surprised, but he said it was just a surprise party for him. I told him I didn't know his boss because he wasn't at the wedding. He said he was out of town for work. Then I decided to go with him because I didn't want Gabriel to be alone. I thought I'd ask Anne to get me something to wear, and as usual, she did a great job. I loved it. The next day, I got ready with Gabriel, and we went to the party. When we got to the venue, it was packed. Gabriel introduced me to some people, and we chatted. Things were going well for a while, so I excused myself to go to the restroom. I finished up and headed back to my surprise. The birthday boy had already walked in, but I couldn't see him because a lot of people had gathered around him. I went out to call Gabriel, saying I had to leave because it was getting late, but he rang late. He said I had to meet his boss before leaving. I said okay, but not long after he came to find me. We went together to meet this boss and say happy birthday to him, but he was busy with some important people. Gabriel asked me to wait a few minutes. We waited for an hour before we were allowed inside. At the moment, I was annoyed because I had to ask myself why he kept us waiting for that long. It wasn't fair no matter who he was. A few minutes later, we were asked to go in and see him. I was already annoyed, but I decided to just forget about it because of Gabriel. When I got inside, I was shocked to see Ross, my ex. I couldn't believe my eyes. My husband's boss, who I hadn't seen in ages, was there. I told myself I wasn't going to act like I knew him, as it had been so long and I was already married. Gabriel introduced us, and I could see the shock on his face too. He decided to play along with it. We didn't know each other, which was fine with me because I didn't want to put Gabriel in a position where he had to deal with the fallout of a personal issue between his wife and his boss. We wished him a happy birthday and left the office, still wondering how Ross was my husband's boss and how strange it was to see him again. The next day, my husband noticed my mood and asked me about it. I told him it was nothing and that I wasn't going to tell him I had a kind of relationship with his boss. I went to work like usual and decided to take my mind off things by getting stuck into some work. After a while, Anne came by. We chatted about Ross, and she was surprised about the dynamics, but I had to tell her not to mention anything to Gabriel because at that point, I wasn't going to pursue anything with him. My friend Anne warned me to stay away from Ross because I was married and he was the one who had left me. When we were still together, I took her advice because I wasn't about to destroy my marriage to Gabriel. A few weeks later, I was at home preparing dinner when Gabriel got back from work. We ate, and he brought up this story of how we needed to attend their yearly gala, which was organized by Holland. I was up for going to the gala, but when Gabriel told me I was going to be involved in organizing it, I was really happy because it could be a great opportunity for my store. I was happy until he told me he'd suggested it to his boss, and I had to go see him the next day to make some preparations. I asked him a few questions. I didn't want to miss out on the chance because of my history with Ross. I decided to go, and I thanked Gabriel for making it happen. I got ready the next day because I had an appointment with Gabriel's boss. I got ready to ride to the office with my husband. When we got there, he kept me waiting like usual, but I remembered I was only there for my store and that this event could put us on the map. I went into his office, and we greeted each other. I got down to business, but he said he needed to attend a meeting and that we should get the meeting started by lunchtime. I was pretty annoyed because I knew he was messing with me. I decided to tell my husband what was going on with how his boss wanted to have a private lunch with me to talk business. He didn't see anything wrong with that, and he'd said I should be patient. I went back to the office and got started with work because I knew after that lunch I was going to be so angry. It was time for lunch, and I wasn't feeling it because I was discouraged. I knew it was just going to open old wounds. I got down to the restaurant where we were having lunch. I saw that Ross was early for the first time since I met him. I sat down and we got to business. He told me how he wanted the event to be, and I took notes. Ross kept talking about us, and I was feeling exhausted about it. I made it clear to him that he was the one who had left me. He had a good reason, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. Ross was persistent, though, and asked me to hear him out. I did, and he told me he'd been left with no other choice because he had to pick between me and his family. I know Ross loved his family, but I didn't understand why. Ross refused to tell me why he'd made the choice he had, saying he'd tell me at our next lunch. I'd already told him I wasn't going to keep having lunch with him because I was married, but he said it was just a harmless lunch that my husband was aware of. A few days later, we started preparing for the event. It was a big one, and I needed more hands to help out, so I employed more people. Everything was going smoothly, but I still had lunch with Ross, which I kept postponing. I knew I had to get around to going because we were going over the last details of our arrangement. I went to lunch with Ross, and we wrapped up everything, and he apologized for what happened a few years back. I was happy because it was in the past now, and we could focus on the event. On the day of the event, everything was set. I went to the event with Gabriel, who was proud of what I'd done with the place. The night, Ross kept staring at me, which I found a bit weird. When he came over to talk to Gabriel, his hand brushed mine a few times. At one point, I felt like he was flirting with me, which was not appropriate. A few weeks later, Ross showed up at my store, telling me he wanted to take me out to thank me. I helped organize the event, but I respectfully declined. Ross insisted I go out with him, and it was fun for us to have reconnected after a very long time. It was fun while it lasted. Ross kept sending me flowers after that day, which was very nice. We talked on the phone for a few minutes. He said he wished he'd come earlier before I got married. He still loved me and wanted to make up for lost time. I decided to give him a chance. We went out for a few dinners, but I didn't think it would harm my husband. I knew it was wrong, though. I was lying to him, and I decided to stop. I discussed it with Ross about us telling Gabriel about us knowing each other, but he said no, because it could affect his work, and he didn't want to lose his best employee over what we had. I told him that since we hadn't done anything wrong, we should come out to Gabriel, but he refused. From that moment on, my secret relationship with Ross grew. We kept seeing each other, and I became too comfortable. I felt like at some point my husband had suspicions about my late-night dinners, but he had thought it was just work. It was like every other day when I met up. Ross had told me I should make time for us, but I had to tell him I was married. If my husband found out we'd been seeing each other secretly, it could be bad for either of us. Ross kept asking for more time with him, so I gave in. In hindsight, I regret my decision because it caused problems for me, my husband, and Ross. I started having issues with my husband because I wasn't at home and I wasn't at the store most days either. I had to lie to Ross that I was busy with other clients, but he believed me for a couple of weeks. A few weeks before Ross went out of town on a business trip, I wasn't happy because I found myself missing him. I made plans for Gabriel and I to go out for dinner since we'd been having issues for a few weeks. We reconnected and everything was okay before Ross returned. I saw him, and at some point we ran into Anne at a restaurant. I didn't know what to say because she had warned me to stay away from Ross, but I didn't listen to her. She pulled me aside and he told me I was making a big mistake going out with my husband's boss, but I didn't listen to her. I told her I went back to meet up with Ross. I didn't know that Anne had already called my husband to the restaurant behind my back. Gabriel came in secretly and saw me with my boss. Ross took me to his house and we spent the night together. The next morning, I saw Ross sleeping naked beside me. I felt like I had done something wrong because everything that Anne had said to me was true. I was going after someone who didn't care about me and had abandoned me. I quickly got ready and went back home to my husband. I planned to apologize to him and tell him. I got home to find Gabriel was really angry with me. He'd already signed the divorce papers. He wasn't interested in hearing anything I had to say. He was very curious about what had happened. I begged him to listen to me, but he said he could have forgiven me if I hadn't slept with his boss, kept on making me feel guilty, which made me feel worse. Gabriel asked me to leave the house, so I did. I shouldn't have been deceived by Ross, who left me when I needed him most. When he found out I was married, he came and ruined my marriage. Updates: I signed the divorce papers. I've signed the divorce papers, and Gabriel and I are officially divorced. It was a very exhausting process. I wasn't happy about it because it took a great toll on me. I lost my husband due to my foolishness. I was happy in that marriage and I knew that my husband loved me, but I went after someone I wasn't sure of. I heard that Gabriel had resigned from work and started his own business, which I was happy about. Through everything that was happening, Anne had come clean to me that she was the one who sold me out to my husband at first. I was very angry at her for doing that, but she said I was going to a place I wasn't. I get that she was only doing that to show me. I was throwing away my marriage for someone who wasn't worth it. But looking back, I wish it never destroyed my marriage. Ever since that night, and everything that happened after, Ross hasn't called me. I've tried calling him a few times, but he ghosted me. That made what I did even worse, because I lost both sides. My relationship with Anne hasn't been the same ever since I lost all contact with Gabriel. I'm now staying with my father, and he has been very supportive. I couldn't have gone through this without his support.